The old ranch sat in silence, the wooden walls creaking under the cold wind. Samuel, a retired human, lived there alone, his days spent fixing fences, feeding animals, and walking through empty fields. Years had passed since he last shared a meal with someone. His heart had grown quiet like the land itself. On one stormy evening, as lightning flashed across the hills, Samuel sat near the fireplace. The rain beat hard on the roof, and the sound made him remember old war days. The silence was broken by a sudden noise, a knocking, soft at first, then louder, echoing through the dark night. Samuel froze. No one ever came to his door, not in years. He stood, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. His hand rested on the old rifle by the wall. Slowly, he walked to the door. The knocking grew urgent, trembling, desperate. With a deep breath, Samuel pulled the door open. There they stood, 11 women, not human, their faces pale under the storm, their strange eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Their clothes were torn, wet and heavy from the rain. Some carried scars. Some held each other for strength. They looked fragile yet proud. Strangers from another world. "Please," one of them whispered, her voice shaking. "Shelter." Samuel stared at them, his heart beating fast. He had seen aliens before, during his years as a soldier in distant wars, but never like this. These women were not warriors. They were widows, broken and lost. His silence stretched, the rain dripping from their clothes onto his floor. The tallest among them stepped forward. She carried herself like a leader, though her eyes showed deep pain. "We have nowhere else to go," she said. "Hunters chase us. We only need rest. We will not harm you." Samuel's first thought was to close the door, to return to his quiet life. But something inside him stirred. The loneliness he carried for years now faced the sorrow of 11 souls before him. He saw himself in their empty eyes, and he could not turn them away. "Come in," he said slowly. His voice was rough, from years of silence, but the words carried weight. The widows stepped inside one by one. The warmth of the fire touched their cold skin. They stood close together, their shoulders brushing, afraid to let go of one another. Samuel watched as they looked around his old cabin with both fear and hope. He gave them blankets, old but clean. The women wrapped themselves tightly, sitting near the fire. For a long while no one spoke. Only the crackling flames filled the room. Samuel sat in his chair, his rifle beside him, studying these strangers. Finally, one of the younger widows broke the silence. "We lost everything," she said, her eyes glistening. "Our husbands, our homes, our children, all gone." Her voice cracked, and another widow placed a hand on her shoulder. Samuel felt the weight of her words. He did not ask for details. He could see the truth in their eyes, battle scars, empty hands, and hearts heavy with grief. They were strangers, yet their pain was familiar. Samuel, too, had lost comrades in war, friends who never came back. He knew the silence of empty nights, the ache of missing voices. In that moment, he felt a strange bond forming, a silent thread pulling him closer to them. The leader widow finally lifted her head. Her voice was calm but firm. "We will leave at dawn. If you allow us just this one night, we will be gone by morning." Samuel looked at the fire, then at the faces turned toward him. He saw more than strangers. He saw survivors clinging to hope, and for the first time in years, his cabin did not feel empty. "You can stay," he said at last. "For as long as you need." The widows gasped softly, relief washing over their faces. Some whispered thanks in their own language, words Samuel did not understand but felt in his heart. As the storm raged outside, the ranch was no longer silent. 11 strangers had stepped into his lonely world, and Samuel knew deep inside, nothing would ever be the same again. The storm outside did not end. Rain poured on the roof, wind whistled through cracks, and thunder rolled across the hills. Inside the cabin, Samuel kept the fire alive. The 11 alien widows sat close, their eyes reflecting the flames, wrapped in his old blankets. They looked both safe and afraid. Samuel leaned back in his chair, his hand rested near his rifle, but his heart felt heavy. He had lived alone for so many years, but tonight his cabin was filled with strangers. He knew they carried secrets that explained the fear in their eyes and the way they held on to each other. For a long time no one spoke. The only sound was the fire crackling and the rain beating outside. Samuel studied them quietly. Some had sharp, silver markings across their skin that glowed faintly. In the firelight, others had deep scars, as if burned or cut by cruel hands. These were not women who had wandered by accident. They were survivors. Finally, the leader widow raised her head. She had long dark hair, soaked and tangled, but her presence was strong. Her voice was calm, but carried sorrow. "We are hunted," she said. "We escaped the war, but hunters follow us. They will not stop until we are gone." Samuel frowned. He had heard of such things in his soldier days. Some alien clans fought endless wars, leaving widows and orphans behind. But to see them here, at his door, was something he never imagined. "Who hunts you?" Samuel asked. His voice was rough but steady. The leader looked into the fire instead of answering. One of the younger widows spoke instead, her voice trembling. "Our husbands died in the war. Their enemies marked us as weak, easy prey. They take what little we have, they sell us, they break us." Her words hung heavy in the air. Samuel felt the sting of old anger rising inside him. He remembered battles, remembered men who preyed on the helpless. He hated such cruelty. Another widow added softly, "We ran for months, hiding in caves, moving at night. We lost 2 sisters along the way. They could not go on." Her voice cracked, and she pressed her hands to her face. Tears slipping between her fingers, the cabin fell silent again. Samuel felt his throat tighten. He wanted to say something, but words did not come easily to him. Instead, he threw another log on the fire, letting its warmth fill the room. One by one, the widows shared pieces of their story. Not everything, but enough. Some had lost children in the war. Some had seen their homes burned. Some had been beaten by those who claimed power over them. Each story was a cut, sharp and deep, and Samuel felt every one of them. Yet in their voices there was also strength. They had crossed deserts, rivers, and mountains to survive. They had stayed together, never leaving one another behind. Their unity was their weapon, even when their bodies were weak. Samuel listened without interrupting. His eyes moved from one face to another. 11 strangers. Yet their pain felt close. He realized they had trusted him, a human they did not know, with truths that could have destroyed them if told to the wrong person. When they finished speaking, silence filled the cabin once more. The fire burned low, casting long shadows on the walls. Samuel finally spoke. His voice was quiet but firm. "If what you say is true, they will find you. Hunters do not give up. If you stay here, they will come to my land." The leader nodded slowly. "We know," she said. "But we had nowhere else to go. We thought maybe, just maybe, a human would give us one night of safety." Samuel's chest tightened. He had lived so long with no one. No voices. No warmth. Now in one night he was asked to share his fire, his home, his life. His heart battled between fear and compassion. He looked at them again, their tired faces, their hopeful eyes, and he remembered something from long ago. A soldier's oath he had once taken, to protect those who could not protect themselves. "You may stay," he said at last, "but understand this. If danger comes, I will not run. I will fight." The widows exchanged glances. Some looked afraid. Others looked relieved. The leader bowed her head. "Then we will fight beside you," she said. Samuel stared at her, surprised. These were not helpless strangers anymore. He could see fire in their eyes, the fire of those who had lost everything but still chose to stand. The rain outside slowed. The thunder grew distant. Inside, the cabin felt warmer. The firelight no longer showed only sorrow. It showed strength. It showed a family beginning to form. That night, Samuel did not feel alone for the first time in years. 11 strangers sat by his fire, and their secrets had tied them all together. What lay ahead would be dangerous, but for the first time, Samuel thought, maybe his lonely ranch had a purpose again. The storm passed, leaving the air cold and heavy. The ranch lay in silence, but Samuel could feel something different. He had lived here for years, and he knew every sound, every path, every shadow. Now the land itself seemed to whisper warnings. The bow. 11 widows woke early, their bodies weak from travel but their eyes alert. They helped Samuel with the animals, carrying buckets, fixing the barn roof, and gathering wood. Their hands were clumsy at first, but together they learned quickly. The ranch, once silent and empty, now moved with life, yet Samuel noticed things that unsettled him. Fences broken overnight, footprints near the stream that did not belong to his animals. At first he thought maybe it was nothing, but the feeling in his chest told him otherwise. He had lived long enough to know when danger was near. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Samuel walked the edge of his land, his boots pressed into the damp soil. His eyes scanned the tall grass. That was when he saw it, a mark carved into a tree, sharp and deliberate. It was not a hunter's mark he recognized, but it was a sign. Someone had been there, someone who wanted to be noticed. When he returned to the cabin, he found the widows sitting close together, their voices low. They stopped speaking when he entered, but he could see the fear on their faces. He placed the rifle against the wall and stared at them. "You've seen signs too, haven't you?" he asked, his voice calm but direct. The leader widow nodded slowly. "Yes, we felt them near. We know how hunters move. They are testing the ground, watching, waiting for us to lower our guard." Samuel tightened his jaw. He had fought wars. He had seen enemies circle like wolves. This was no different. The ranch was no longer safe, not for him and not for them. That night Samuel could not sleep. He sat by the window, the rifle across his lap. The moonlight lit the fields. Shadows stretched long and strange. More than once, he thought he saw movement near the tree line, but when he looked closer, there was nothing. The widows, too, were restless. Some whispered prayers in their language. Others sharpened old tools into makeshift weapons. They were not warriors, but grief had given them courage. Samuel watched them, and in their faces he saw something that stirred his old soldier's heart. They were afraid, but they were ready. Days passed, and the signs grew clearer, tracks in the mud, faint voices carried on the wind. Once, Samuel found a piece of cloth caught on the barbed fence. Dark, rough fabric, not from his land. His instincts screamed. The hunters were near. He began preparing the ranch. His hands, once stiff from age, moved with purpose. He reinforced the doors, set traps along the fence line, and showed the widows how to use his tools. They listened carefully, learning quickly. Some were stronger than others, but all were willing. In the evenings, the cabin became a place of quiet strength. The widows told him stories of their fallen husbands, of battles fought under red skies, of homes turned to ash. Samuel listened. His heart ached for them. But he also felt something else. Admiration. These women had walked through fire and still stood tall. One night, as the fire burned low, the youngest widow spoke. "Do you regret letting us in?" she asked softly. Her voice carried both fear and hope. Samuel looked at her, his eyes steady. "No," he said simply. "I regret nothing, but I won't lie to you. Danger is coming, and when it does, this land will not be quiet anymore." The widows exchanged glances. Their leader nodded. "Then we will not hide. If they come, we will stand with you." Samuel felt something stir deep inside him. For years, he had lived like a ghost, waiting for his days to end in silence. But now 11 strangers had given him a reason to rise again. The ranch was no longer just his. It was theirs. That night, the shadows in the field grew darker, the air grew colder, and Samuel knew with certainty the hunters had found them. They were watching, waiting, moving closer with every night. The ranch was no longer just a home. It was a battlefield waiting to be claimed. And Samuel, the man who thought his fighting days were over, now stood ready to defend it. Not alone, But with 11 widows who had already lost everything, they would not lose again. The ranch stood quiet under the pale moon. The air was too still, too heavy. Even the animals were restless. Samuel walked the fence line with his rifle in hand, his boots sinking in the damp earth. His eyes scanned the darkness, every shadow looked alive. Inside the cabin, the widows huddled together. Some sat near the fire, their hands holding sharpened tools Samuel had given them. Others kept watch by the windows. Their eyes glowed faintly, catching every flicker of movement outside. Fear filled the air, but so did a strange determination. Samuel's soldier instincts told him it was close. The waiting was over. He felt the weight of the night pressing down. Somewhere out there in the silence of the hills, the hunters were moving, testing, circling like wolves. Then it came. A sudden sound. Wood snapping near the barn. Samuel spun, rifle raised. His finger rested on the trigger. But before he could fire, the sound of rushing footsteps filled the night. Shadows broke from the tree line, dark figures sprinting across the fields. Inside, Samuel shouted, his voice cut through the night like thunder. The widows rushed to the door, but 3 of them stopped, their eyes wide with terror. Samuel fired a shot, the rifle cracked, and one of the shadows stumbled and fell. The rest kept coming, their growls echoing across the land. The first wave hit the fence, tearing through it with ease. Samuel's traps caught 2 of them, snapping iron jaws closing on their legs. Their screams pierced the night, but still more climbed over. Their eyes glowed red, their weapons crude. But deadly inside the cabin, the widows armed themselves with whatever they could. Axes, hammers, sharpened poles. They had sworn not to run, and now their vow was tested. The leader widow, her voice steady despite her fear, called out, "Stand together. No one falls alone." The door shook as the hunters slammed against it. Samuel fired again, reloading quickly. He felt years melt away, his body moving as if it had never grown old. His mind sharp, his focus narrow. He was a soldier once more. The door burst open, splinters flying. 2 hunters rushed inside, snarling, their bodies tall and twisted, covered in scars and war paint. The widow screamed but did not run. One struck with an axe, the blade sinking deep into the attacker's arm. Another swung a hammer, breaking bone. Samuel stormed in behind them, firing point blank. The blast lit the cabin, and 1 hunter fell to the floor. The other staggered, blood spilling before collapsing into the firelight. The widows stared at the bodies, their chests heaving. The reality of the fight struck them, but so did a new fire. They were not helpless anymore. More. Hunters pushed at the windows, their claws scraping against the glass. Samuel barked orders. "Barricade it now." The widows moved quickly, dragging furniture, pushing against the frames. One young widow cried out as a hunter's hand grabbed her arm through the window. Samuel struck with the butt of his rifle, smashing its skull until it let go. The night became chaos, screams, gunfire, the crash of wood and stone. Samuel fought with a strength he thought he had lost. The widows fought beside him, their fear turning into fury. They had lost their homes, their families, their lives. But here, in this cabin, they found something worth defending. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the hunters pulled back. Their howls echoed in the hills, a promise that they would return. The ground outside was stained with blood, both theirs and Samuel's enemies. The fence lay broken, the barn half collapsed, but the cabin still stood. Inside, the widows collapsed to the floor, trembling, their faces pale but alive. Some cried, some laughed in disbelief. The leader stood, blood streaking her cheek, but her voice strong. "We did not fall," she said. "We stood together." Samuel wiped the sweat and dirt from his brow. His chest heaved, his body ached, but his eyes burned with fire. He looked at the widows and nodded. "This was only the first," he said. "They will come again, stronger. But now they know this ranch is not easy prey." The widows nodded. Fear remained in their eyes, but so did pride. For the first time since their flight began, they had fought back and survived. As dawn broke, painting the sky red and gold, Samuel stepped outside. His land was scarred, but it was still his. He stared at the horizon, knowing the battle was Far from over, the hunters would return, but so would his resolve. For years he had lived alone, waiting to fade away. Now he had a reason to fight again, not for himself, but for the 11 widows who looked at him not just as a man, but as their protector, their last hope. The first attack was over, but the war for the ranch had only begun. The sun rose slowly over the hills, painting the ranch in pale gold. The storm was gone, but the land carried scars of the night before, broken fences, blood on the ground, and smoke rising from the barn where the hunters had tried to burn it. Samuel stood outside, his rifle leaning against the wall, his tired eyes scanning the horizon. Inside the cabin, the widows were quiet. Some sat together, wrapping bandages around bruises and cuts. Others moved slowly, cleaning the mess of broken wood and scattered furniture. The youngest widow stirred the fire back to life, her hands shaking but determined. The leader of the widows stood near Samuel. She watched the field with him, her eyes sharp and unyielding. "They will come again," she said, her voice low. Samuel nodded, his jaw tight. "Yes, but next time we will be ready." The widows did not hide in fear. Instead, they worked. They mended fences with what wood they could find, carried water to the animals, and patched the holes in the walls. Samuel guided them, showing them how to tie rope, how to fix a gate, how to sharpen a blade. He had lived alone for years, but now every task felt different. Every movement carried, meaning because he was not doing it alone anymore. At first, Samuel thought they were only survivors, weak and broken. But as days passed, he saw their hidden strength. One widow, tall and strong, lifted heavy beams with ease. Another, gentle and quiet, tended to the wounded animals with a healer's touch. The youngest widow, barely more than a girl, laughed softly as she learned to milk the cows. Her laughter filled the air like a song Samuel had forgotten existed. Around the fire at night, they began to speak more openly. Their stories were painful, but they were no longer told with only tears. They spoke of children they had lost, but also of memories of love and laughter. Before the war, Samuel listened. His heart ached for them, but also warmed. He realized that their grief was slowly turning into strength. One evening, after a long day of repairs, Samuel sat by the fire with the widows. He felt their eyes on him, curious and cautious. The leader spoke. "Why did you let us stay?" she asked. "You could have sent us away. You could have saved yourself this danger." Samuel stared into the flames. His voice came out rough but honest. "I lived alone for years, waiting to fade away. I had nothing left. But when I saw you, that night I remembered what it was to fight for someone. I remembered I was still alive." The room grew quiet. The widows exchanged glances, and one of them, her eyes shining with tears, whispered, "You gave us back more than shelter. You gave us a reason to keep going." In that moment, something shifted. They were no longer just strangers sharing a roof. They had become something more. Samuel did not want to name it yet, but he felt it in his chest. For years, his cabin had been a tomb of silence. Now it was a place of warmth, voices, and laughter. Together they shared meals, bread baked by clumsy hands, stew made from Samuel's garden. The widows added their own skills, cooking with strange spices they carried in small pouches hidden in their clothes. The smell filled the cabin with a richness Samuel had not known in years. At night, when the wind howled and the shadows outside grew long, Samuel no longer felt the weight of fear alone. The widows sat with him, their presence strong. He realized that his ranch, once just a piece of lonely land, had turned into a home again. But even as their bond grew, the danger did not fade. Strange cries echoed in the hills at night, and the hunters' marks appeared closer each morning. Samuel knew the peace they shared was fragile. He saw it in the leader widow's eyes too, the understanding that every day they had was borrowed time. Still, when they sat together by the fire, when the youngest widow laughed or when the others sang low songs in their alien tongue, Samuel felt something powerful, something he had not felt since his soldier days. He felt like part of a family. One evening, as stars glittered above, Samuel stepped outside with the leader. The land stretched quiet and wide, but the air carried tension. "We can survive," she said, her voice steady. "Not because we are strong, but because we are together." Samuel looked at her. the firelight behind them glowing through the cabin windows. For years he had thought his story was ending. Now, with 11 widows beside him, he realized it was only beginning. The bonds of family had been forged not by blood, but by fire, grief, and survival. And Samuel knew, when the hunters returned, they would not find a broken man and widows waiting to die. They would find a family ready to fight. The days after the first attack passed in uneasy silence. The widows worked hard beside Samuel, repairing fences, mending tools, and caring for the animals. Yet their eyes often drifted toward the hills, where shadows seemed to move at dusk. Fear hung over the ranch like a heavy cloud. Samuel felt it too. He woke before dawn and walked the land with his rifle, his boots pressed into soft earth, his eyes sharp. Every broken branch, every strange track in the mud made his stomach tighten. The hunters were not gone. They were waiting, gathering, preparing for something worse. At night, the ranch was alive with whispers. The widows spoke quietly among themselves. Some sang low songs in their alien tongue, voices filled with sorrow and hope. Samuel listened, though he could not understand the words. The sound gave him strength, reminding him why he had chosen to fight. One evening, the leader widow stood, with him by the broken barn. Her eyes followed the horizon. "They are gathering," she said softly. "I can feel it. They never stop. They will come with more." Samuel nodded, his jaw set. "Then we prepare." He began turning the ranch into a fortress. His hands, once used only for simple chores, now moved with the discipline of a soldier. He reinforced the doors with iron plates, dug trenches around the cabin, and set traps in the tall grass. The widows helped, carrying wood, shaping spears, and learning how to use Samuel's weapons. Some of them surprised him. The tall widow, with glowing silver markings, was skilled with a bow Samuel had long forgotten in the barn. She shot arrows with steady hands, hitting targets again and again. Another widow crafted sharp blades from farm tools, her eyes focused, her hands quick. The youngest widow, though frightened, learned fast. Samuel taught her how to reload the rifle, her small hands fumbling at first, but soon moving with confidence. Her smile when she succeeded warmed him. It had been years since he had seen such determination in young eyes. But even as they trained and worked, unease grew. Strange noises drifted from the woods at night, distant drums, howls carried on the wind. Once, Samuel saw a fire burning on the ridge, figures dancing around it before vanishing into the dark. The hunters were taunting them, showing their strength. The widows felt it too. Their laughter became rarer, their songs quieter. Yet they stood tall, shoulders squared, voices steady. They had already survived so much, and now with Samuel, they refused to break. One night, as the fire burned low, the widows gathered close. The leader spoke. "We cannot only defend, they will keep coming wave after wave until we fall." Samuel's eyes narrowed. He had thought the same but kept it buried. "What do you suggest?" he asked. She met his gaze. "We fight not only to survive but to end this. We must show them that we are not prey." The room fell into silence. The widow's eyes glowed in the firelight. Some nodded slowly, others clenched their fists. Samuel looked at them, tired, scarred, but fierce. He realized they were no longer simply survivors. They were becoming warriors. The next morning, Samuel led them into the fields. They practiced moving together, covering one another, fighting as a unit. It was not perfect, but it was better than chaos. The ranch echoed with shouts, with the crack of gunfire, with the thud of arrows hitting targets. Samuel felt younger, his body aching but alive. He shouted commands, corrected mistakes, praised efforts. The widows listened, their eyes sharp, their hands steady. They trusted him, not just as a man with a rifle, but as their protector, their leader. Still, fear lingered in the air. The hunters. Signs grew closer each day. Carcasses of animals left on the edge of the fields. Strange symbols painted in blood on the fences. Samuel erased them, but the widows saw, and their fear deepened. At night, storms gathered in the sky. Lightning flashed over the hills. Thunder rolled like distant drums of war. Samuel sat by the window, rifle across his lap, watching. He knew the final storm was coming, not of rain and wind, but of blood and fire. The leader widow sat beside him, her face lit by the glow of the fire. "Do you regret this?" she asked. "Taking us in, choosing this fight?" Samuel shook his head slowly, his voice steady. "No, alone. I was already dead. With you, I live again. If this is the fight I must face, then I welcome it." Her eyes softened. For a moment, the weight of her sorrow lifted. She placed her hand gently on his. "Then we will stand with you, to the end." Outside, the wind howled louder. The sky split with lightning. The gathering storm was no longer only in the clouds. It was in the land, in their hearts, in the shadows of the hunters who were drawing closer with every night. The ranch stood waiting. A small cabin, a broken barn, and 12 souls preparing for a battle that would decide not only their survival, but their future. The night came heavy with silence. The hills were black under the storm clouds, and the air carried the smell of rain and ash. Samuel stood outside the cabin, rifle in hand, his eyes fixed on the dark tree line. He knew this was the night. The hunters had been circling for days, marking the land, leaving warnings. Tonight they would strike with everything they had. Inside the cabin, the widows prepared, their hands shook but their eyes burned with fire. They tied cloth around their arms, sharpened blades, and loaded weapons Samuel had given them. They had trained together, fought together, and now they stood not as broken widows but as warriors. The leader placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder, her voice steady. "We are ready." Samuel nodded. His heart was heavy but also fierce. For years he had waited for death in silence, but now he wanted to live, not for himself, but for the 11 women who had trusted him. The first sound was a horn, low and cruel, rolling across the hills. Then came the answering howls, dozens of voices rising in the dark. Shadows moved at the edge of the fields. Torches flickered, weapons gleamed. The hunters had come in full force. "Positions," Samuel called. His voice cut through the cabin like steel. The widows moved as they had practiced, some to the windows, some to the doors, others crouched low with bows and spears. Samuel took his place at the front, the rifle resting steady against his shoulder. The hunters charged. Their feet thundered across the earth, their cries wild and vicious. Arrows flew first, lit with fire. Some struck the barn, setting it ablaze. Others bounced off the reinforced cabin walls. The ranch lit up in orange and red. Samuel fired. His shot dropped the first attacker, then another. The widows followed. Arrows whistled, blades flashed. Their fear turned into fury. The cabin shook with the sound of battle. The hunters hit the fences, tearing them apart. They poured into the fields like a wave. Some fell into traps Samuel had set, their screams filling the night. But still more came. Their numbers seemed endless. The door crashed open under the force of many hands. Hunters stormed inside. The widows met them head-on. The tall widow with silver markings swung her bow like a club. Cracking a skull, another drove a spear into an enemy's chest, blood spraying across the walls. Samuel fought like a man reborn. His rifle cracked again and again. When it was empty, he grabbed an axe, swinging with all his strength. The years of age seemed to vanish. His body ached, but his spirit burned brighter than ever. The battle raged through the night. The cabin became a fortress of fire and fury. Hunters fell one by one, but not without cost. 2 widows were wounded, their blood staining the floor. Samuel roared like a beast, refusing to let them fall. He fought harder, his eyes wild with rage and love for the family he had found. Hours passed like minutes. The fire of the barn spread, lighting the land in gold and crimson. The hunters, seeing their losses, began to falter. Their howls turned to cries of despair. Samuel stood in the doorway, bloodied but unbroken. His voice thundered across the fields. "This land is not yours. Leave or die." The widows raised their weapons beside him, their glowing eyes fierce. Together they looked like an army of ghosts and fire. The hunters hesitated. Then one by one they fled into the dark, their torches scattering like dying stars. Silence fell. Only the crackle of fire and the ragged breaths of the survivors remained. Samuel lowered his weapon, his hands trembling. Around him the widows dropped to their knees, tears falling not only of pain but of relief. They had won. The dawn came slowly, soft light spilling across the broken land. The barn lay in ashes, the fences shattered, but the cabin still stood. Samuel stepped outside, the cool morning air filling his lungs. The widows followed, their faces tired but alive. For years, he had lived in silence, waiting to fade away. Now his ranch echoed with voices, laughter, and songs in a language he did not understand but felt deep in his heart. They were not strangers anymore. They were his family. The leader stood beside him, her eyes soft. "We lost everything once," she said quietly. "But here, we have found something new." Samuel looked at the land, scarred but strong. He looked at the widows, proud and unbroken, and he felt something he thought was gone forever. Hope. The hunters might return one day. The world might still be cruel. But Samuel no longer stood alone. He had 11 widows who now called his cabin their home. And together, they had turned loneliness into strength, despair into family, silence into life. The final stand was over, but the new dawn had just begun.